Welcome back to another Fantasy Puck video, guys. It's Chris, and today I'm going to be going over must-drop players for Week 4. This is our very first must-drop players video. The reason for this is now that we have a little bit of sample to go off of and seeing player deployment and player production early on in the season, we're able to give you guys better recommendations now than we would with just a couple games in or within the first couple weeks. So that being said, along with the fact that there are a lot of players that are on the waiver wire that are very, very good and should be added to teams right now, we definitely wanted to give you guys some options for players to drop. We've had a lot of questions about players, those hiring guys that aren't performing right now. Again, we preach patience with those guys, but in combination with our must add players video for Week 4, which will be coming out tomorrow, we highly recommend dropping some of these players given your league size and settings. That being said, guys, let's get right into the video. Up first, we have Hampus Lindholm of the Boston Bruins. I was absolutely shocked to see that he was 82% owned. I thought that there was something that I was just missing when it came to this player, but he's got 0 points in the first 6 games. I guess he can be a hold in 12 or 12 plus team leagues. I understand the value of having him given the season that he had last year, but he's only had over 35 points one time in his career, which was last year, his first year in Boston. I just think that there isn't really a lot of value for holding on to him in 10-team leagues. There are better defensemen out there that give you better peripherals. His shot volume isn't great. Like I said, he doesn't have any points in his first 6 games. The power play 2 options right now aren't very good for Boston. I would understand if they put him on power play 1 alongside Charlie McAvoy. At least that way he's having some type of value on the power play. But there, again, are just better options in terms of defensemen that hit, defensemen that block. And he just hasn't been good to start the season. I think in 10-team leagues, you can look for other options. I totally understand holding on to him if you're in a 12 or a 12-plus team league. Are pretty lackluster. 1 hit, 7 shots, and 11 blocks. He just seems to be another low-event defenseman that just seems to play a ton of minutes. Whatever combination that works for you and your league settings, I think there are better defensemen out there that just offer you more on a more consistent basis than Cam Fowler. Tyler Bertuzzi has had a very, very slow start, especially given the opportunity that was presented to him in Toronto to start the season. He's got 2 points in 6 games, which again is not terrible, but the peripherals are just not there, guys. He doesn't really shoot, he doesn't really hit, he doesn't block. He's a guy that's on the second power play unit that just barely sees any time because of how predominant the first power play unit is in Toronto. Not only that, but his average time on ice is under 16 minutes, which is shocking considering that he's stayed in a top 6 role up until this point. I think there's a legitimate chance that they try him on the third line and they move up a guy like Max Domi or Matthew Knies, for example. We've already seen a change on line 1 as Toronto has moved up Cal Yarncroke to play with Matthews and Marner. He skated last game with Tavares and Nylander where he picked up a point, but outside of that, Bertuzzi is in danger of losing his top 6 role given the fact that he just hasn't really shown anything positive in Toronto's top 6. In 10-team leagues, you can definitely look for better options, but again, I could be a little bit premature on this one, guys. It could be worth holding him going forward if he does end up finding his game. There is always a little bit of an adjustment process when you're going to a new team, especially early on in the season. I think it takes a little bit for players to kind of wind up their game. Bertuzzi could be one of these guys. I still think there's a little bit of upside for Bertuzzi if he ends up sticking in the top 6, but it looks less and less likely every day. Up next, we have Philipp Grubauer of the Seattle Kraken. I think he's a drop in 10-team leagues and maybe some 12-team leagues depending on which goalies are available. I've seen a lot of people drop the Edmonton goalies in Campbell and Skinner. So if either of those guys are available, I think they're worth taking a shot on given the fact that Edmonton should be able to turn things around. I know they've also had a slow start, but back on Grubauer, like Joey Daccord is cutting into his volume. The main reason why you would want to draft this guy in the first place is because he would have been the clear-cut starter in Seattle. This isn't the case to start off the season. He's currently 0-4 in games that he's played with an .896 save percentage and a .304 goals against. These are not great numbers at all. I know Grubauer has historically struggled in Seattle, and I think if he ends up retaining his starter's role, he does have value in that sense. But if he ends up splitting a lot of time with Joey Daccord, who seems to be the only goalie that has racked up some wins for Seattle when he's played, I think Grubauer is definitely worth dropping and trying to find better goalie options, at least guys that are going to at least pick up some wins going forward. So for Grubauer, depending on your goaltending situation, I think he's good for a drop in 10-team leagues and some 12-team leagues. Up next, Evgeny Kuznetsov of the Washington Capitals, another team that has been struggling drastically. He does have 1 point in 5 games. It's a slow start for Kuznetsov. 11 shots on goal is pretty solid, but he's got 1 hit and 0 blocks, so doesn't really offer anything in terms of peripherals, really. Washington continues to blend their lines. On top of that, we've seen Dylan Strome start on first line. Like, we've seen Nicholas Backstrom moved up and down. So it's tough for Kuznetsov to find his footing right now, especially when he's not playing with Ovechkin. There's not a lot of hope right now for Kuznetsov, especially after what we saw last year. He struggled and was around the 50-point mark. I just don't think the weapons in Washington are what they used to be. We've seen Ovi even struggle a little bit to start the season. I do think he will find his game, but if Kuznetsov doesn't have any exposure to any decent wingers right now, it's going to be tough for him to put up points, and the peripherals just aren't there for me. I definitely recommend dropping him and finding somebody better. Next up, we got Jonathan Drouin of the Colorado Avalanche. He's got 1 point in 6 games, and historically, he's been very, very bad peripherals-wise. The only real reason that you would have drafted this guy was the exposure to McKinnon playing first line. That is not the case right now. His average time on ice is well below 14 minutes, almost close to 13 minutes. He's getting constantly moved around the lineup, and there's just no value for having this guy on your team at this point due to the fact that his peripherals are just so lackluster, along with the fact that he just isn't skating with McKinnon consistently enough. Drouin isn't even seeing second line minutes. He's stuck on the third line with Ross Colton and Miles Wood, 2 guys that you don't want to have any exposure to if you're a Jonathan Drouin owner. I get, again, very similar. You want to play the upside if he's skating with McKinnon, but it's just not the case to start the season, guys. I think there are much, much better options. And finishing up our list for our must drops for week 4, Connor Brown. Very similar situation to Jonathan Drouin, except it's arguably worse right now. 0 points in 6 games. 2 of his last 6 games, he's had 0 total fantasy points. A bunch of donuts on the board for him. His time on ice is slightly better than Drouin, but not much better at 15.06. I just don't think the upside's there, guys. Honestly, like, I understand why people were high on him and would, you know, take a shot on him in drafts. If he ended up sticking with McDavid and playing with him and seeing a lot of early on production, I think that's a good option. Who knows, later down the road, similar to Drouin, if they end up catching fire by continuing to play first line minutes with McDavid and McKinnon. But right now, again, I think there's much, much better options. The upside does not seem to be there for Connor Brown, especially skating with Ryan McLeod and Dylan Holloway, with McDavid being out for a couple weeks. I highly recommend checking the waiver wire for streaming options going forward. That is going to do for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed the content, and let me know in the comments down below who you think some people are that are considered or worthy of a drop right now. I know there's a lot of high-end guys that are struggling, but again, for those higher-end players, guys, I preach patience going forward. Always love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions, but thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.